Episode 37 of Red versus Blue, an international edition, because I'm still in the good old USA, but Keith is in Canada. What's new in Canada, Keith?
Hey, everybody. Good morning. I'm here in Vancouver, Canada, a beautiful city in the Pacific Northwest, and it's a delightful day. We're getting ready to get out and enjoy a little bit of the Pacific Northwest.
Awesome. And you picked up a local paper there, and there's some discussion in the paper about Canada putting a tariff on electric cars, which kind of applies to what's going on with the two economic plans that the presidential candidates have, right?
Well, it does. So if you're following the economic plans of both Harris and Trump, particularly Trump, but Harris and Biden have kept in place the Trump tariffs from before. So they're sort of all in on tariffs as well. Both of them believe in putting tariffs on vehicles or any other product really imported from China. Well, as happens in yesterday's Vancouver Sun, there's an article about Tesla, because Tesla manufactures 950,000 electric vehicles at its plant in Shanghai, China. And among those, 37,000 are exported to Canada. So that is where Canada gets its Teslas from China. And the reason for that is because they're cheaper to produce in China, and they can sell them for a better price in Canada, even though the United States is much closer and they have less shipping costs. So the Canadian government has proposed a 100% tariff on electric vehicles coming from China. The economic impact of that is such that BYD, which is, most people in America don't know that most of the exported electric vehicles come from China throughout the world. Right. BYD is their mass market manufacturer. They can produce a car that would sell in Canada for $16,000. They're going to put a tariff on that. A Tesla here coming from China sells for $50,000. The tariff would double that price to $100,000, and it would be the equivalent cost of a Chevy from the United States would be $41,000. So the impact to Canadian consumers who are wanting to buy an electric vehicle, and Canada is probably more forward-thinking and more advanced on green policies, certainly than the United States, is that those costs are going to be substantially higher because of tariff policies. And we can extrapolate that the exact same thing is going to happen in the United States when we start putting those kinds of tariffs on products that come from China as well. So if inflation is your concern, with the cost of prices going up, Canada gives us a real-life example of what happens when these tariff policies get implemented by both major candidates.
Yeah, that's interesting that you would chance upon that in your travels to Canada.
Just to keep our show relevant.
Absolutely. Now, RFK last week, if I remember, he hadn't dropped out, right?
We were all doing our show, waiting for him to strive there and make his long, ponderous announcement, which he did. And after basically blaming the United States and the West for causing the war in Ukraine, and basically saying that the Democrats had dissed him and are conspiring to keep him off the ballot, basically expressing his desire for more roadkill, he endorsed Donald Trump. He did not pull out of all the states. He's still on the ballot in some states. He still has a very liberal Democratic vice presidential candidate who I guess is, I don't know what she's doing. Maybe she's still out there campaigning. She did acknowledge that they hadn't pulled out of the race entirely, but he did endorse Donald Trump and urge everybody in a competitive state who supports him to support Trump. Now, when we saw the rise in Harris in the polls, a lot of that was Democrats who were not going to vote for Biden, but who were okay voting for Harris, who had otherwise parked themselves with Kennedy, moving off of Kennedy. That left him, he started out at about 11% in the polls. He sort of bottomed out when he pulled out at 5%. Most of those people now, polls tell us, are Trump voters or would otherwise be Trump voters. So it remains to be seen the impact that he's going to have on the election. He was ostensibly promised a job in the administration. He and Tulsi Gabbard, who is also highly critical of Ukraine and is another person who toes very strongly to the Russian line, as does RFK Jr., have been named as co-chairman of the co-honorary chairman, important distinction, of the Trump transition team, meaning that it's going to take a real strong look, much like the bar scene at Star Wars when they all get together. And I would just advise Mr. Trump, be careful what you wish for when you get these kind of people in the room, and they're ostensibly for you because they could do some damage just about any day every time they open their mouth.
Well, a small side note to this whole thing is that I understand RFK Jr.'s wife is not at all happy about this situation.
She's not. He's married to Cheryl Hines, the actress. She is a strong liberal Democrat, and I'm just as happy I'm not at the Kennedy House every night to hear those discussions. But I expect that they are not pleasant. Yeah. Now, we should stop here because the Democratic Party had been absolutely ruthless in going after the third-party candidates. Kennedy had been kicked off the ballot in New York because they claimed he did not have adequate residence there. He used the same New York address in several other states to qualify for the ballot, so he may come off the ballot in other states. On the other hand, the Democrats now have stopped that, and they say, "Nah, leave him on. We want him on the ballot." So we'll see what happens. And bad news for the Democrats: Jill Stein did stay on the ballot in Wisconsin, and she is highly critical of the Democrats for their efforts to kick her off. Cornel West, however, did get pushed off the Pennsylvania ballot, so he will not be on the ballot. So, a month or two ago, we were very concerned about the impact of the third parties and what they were going to have in the election. It looks like now it's going to be fairly minimal, and in many of the key states, they're not going to be on the ballot at all due to some very ruthless legal maneuvers on behalf of the Democrats.
Okay, and not a good week for Trump again. This is just a repeat. He continues to do what his advisors tell him not to do, and that's only good for the Democrats.
Well, it is. He ought to be well ahead. And if he had the discipline to go after Harris on her economic vulnerabilities, he would be ahead. But he's slipping, and he becomes more and more irrelevant every time he goes up to speak. He's now flip-flopped on abortion and on IVF in a way that I think may be the last straw for many of the people in the pro-life movement. They take that movement seriously.
Yes.
Those views are held morally and deeply, and people have been pursuing that cause for many, many decades. And I think he may have gone a bridge too far with that group on some of his new positions because he's completely transactional. His opinion is whatever he thinks is going to be most beneficial to him, by 2:00 in the afternoon. And by 4:00, it may change again. And here's the thing. The biggest criticism about Harris, and we'll talk about this, we talked about her comments in an interview last night, is that she is a flip-flopper. And she is a flip-flopper that would make John Kerry look like a guy who never deviates from his previous statements. In fact, at the Republican convention, they had sandals that were John Kerry flip-flops because he had done that. He voted for the bill till he voted against it. Well, she makes him look like a piker. And that's the most strong issue that Trump can criticize her on. But yet, because of his own flip-flops, everybody sits there and goes, well, they're all flip-flopping together like fish in a barrel.
Right. Lots of flip-flopping this year for some reason, which brings us to the interview, which was held last night. And it's my feeling that she just played it safe because she sees what Trump's doing to himself. So she didn't go into any waters that were deep at all. Is that a fair analysis? Mike,
she played the interview so safe. She even brought an emotional support white male with her just to make sure she was, protected and didn't make any mistakes.
Oh, that's bad.
She went on. She explained that she flip-flopped her position on fracking back in 2020. Now, remember in 2019, she campaigned hard that she was opposed to fracking.
Right.
Then she basically got out of the race before the New Year's began. And sometime during 2020, she changed her position, just didn't tell anybody. Right. So now she's claiming it's a position she's held for 4 years. One has to wonder what other positions has she changed and not told anybody else on. But I suspect the Medicare for All and the Green New Deal may be among them.
I will say, though, that she finessed that pretty well. From what I saw, she finessed it pretty well.
Her line was that my values have not changed, which means her values either do not inform her positions or wink, wink, liberals, I'm really with you guys. Just let me get through this election and let me see what I need to say. Either way, it's not a good look. But there's a lot more interviews yet to come, hopefully.
Okay. What else we got to talk about before we send you on your way on your continuing vacation?
Well, let's just talk a little bit about price gouging, because that's another key part of her economic plan. She brought it up again without actually telling us who is doing the price gouging. Supermarkets have, on average, a profit margin of 1.1%. There's a merger proposed now with Albertsons. They have a margin of 1.6%. So they compete with Costco, who sells gold bars and jewelry and tires and everything else that raises their margins a little bit where they can be more competitive. So there's not a lot of margin to squeeze there. So who are the price gougers? Are they the farmers? Is she going to go after farmers? I'm not sure she really wants to make that case. So she's got a policy that she staked out and no place really to go with. But I will say this. There is one place where you can reduce the cost of food production, and that is in the ethanol subsidies and requirements that ethanol go into gasoline. Because the federal government requires ethanol to go into gasoline, the price of corn from which ethanol is made is artificially high. In that mandate, the price of corn drops, and so everything from corn flakes to corn syrup to tortillas will fall as well. Now, the reason why Iowa has the first in the nation caucus is not because people like to caucus in the snow. It's because that allows them the leverage to protect the ethanol subsidies. So I don't think either candidate is going to touch that, but that's one way, in a realistic way, the government could reduce the cost of food. I don't see her going there. I think she's going to continue to make these rhetorical comments about price gouging.
All right. Can I send you on your way now?
Well, I think I'm ready to go out into the great north here.
Okay.
And we'll have another adventure in a couple of weeks and see where politics is going. Every day is a new adventure in terms of where we are.
Absolutely. And you're going to go on vacation. We're going to be off next week. Hopefully it'll be a slow week. It's never a slow week, but we'll catch up when we get back. And I want to thank you all for joining us for another edition of Red versus Blue. And be sure and subscribe and like our Facebook page. Leave us a nice comment on iTunes and all of that. And have a good vacation, Keith. We'll see you next in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.